I'd like to, just in this session, give you some preview of where we're heading with the church survey in its development in the next phase. Don't worry, we're not reducing to 7 body characteristics or anything like that. All the foundations remain the same, but we've learned lots of things, and we have the chance to work out how can we help people into the process much more effectively. And just by way of history, I put at the beginning NCD Church Survey 7.0. There seemed to be sort of 7 stages of the development survey. So you had this pre-empirical stage, which we kind of talked about here, the early work of Fritz and Christian on the survey. And that was then followed by the more famous 94-96 worldwide research project. A little known fact about that is that when it came to do the international research to thoroughly validate it according to the highest statistical standards, almost nothing changed from the early days of what they developed walking around the place. And I just think that's remarkable, a remarkable tribute to Christian and his father in terms of the level of questioning your own presumptions, the level of being open and attentive and really trying to look at how things work, that the international research validated pretty much what they had worked out by doing that. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And he's not here, so I can say it. Yeah, just an amazing thing. 3.0, detailed analysis came onto the picture. 2002, Profile Plus and other tools emerged. And as with all good Reformation processes, the warnings of doom were sounded that we've destroyed NCD and no one will ever understand a detailed analysis report. Okay, good. 4, we did a big survey review in 2007 to retest and refine all the items, and we mentioned that the other day, and saw that not only did the key factors of the original research stand up, but in many instances they were strengthened in terms of the validation and significance. 5, the online survey was born. Interesting background. We went through, it was just before I'd come onto the scene, Christian and Christoph had gone through 7 different computer programming groups to try to make it happen. One guy changed religion halfway through the process. Someone else took the deposit money and ran, and in every other case, they couldn't deliver it whatsoever. So by this stage, it's like, okay, is this even possible to do? And so my friend Jeff and I talked about it. We met when we were 13 years old and said, well, we think we can do this. And it was a monstrous undertaking, but nevertheless, that was born. 6, NCD Perspectives, which some of you may be aware of, although it's only available in English, came into the picture, which is a means of feeding back to the online participants what their particular view of church life looks like, and they can compare that with the church and say, well, this is what it looks like for me, and maybe this is the contrast that it has to the overall church profile. And then we come to 7, which is where we're up to now. And I've just called this phase, it's difficult to even know what to call it, but data to discernment, getting to the heart of the results. So we're in the process, and it's so difficult to disconnect yourself from things and try to imagine being a first-time pastor coming to the results when you live in it all the time. And trying to imagine, well, what's in their minds, what questions will there be, what's the first thing you want people to see, knowing there's plenty of other things that will follow, but where does that journey begin? And so we're, again, at the end of the session, I'm wanting to get feedback in general and thoughts, because this is still under development and you're the obvious people to have feeding into that. So imagine you've completed the survey. Some of you will be happy to know the new version will have a bulk upload option so that you can copy and paste the whole list of email addresses. It's really inspired of getting the email question through help desk saying, this is what I've uploaded, everyone must. So that will be there for you tech nerds who want to know about that. But you hit the calculate button, and there's this mystical moment of terror because you have no idea what your people said and what's going to be happening. But really wanting to position to say, what are we looking at? And the question may be as simple as, how much life are we allowing to flourish? And it's an open. It might be great, it may not be a great deal, but the words are important. They're not fixed yet, but that we are allowing to flourish. Immediately it speaks into, we're looking for barrier removal. We're looking for how we can allow God's life to flow in our church more, and we will get to see where we've already been able to allow it to flow. Sorry, that's just the link to the pot plant video. I wasn't originally going to show it. The hope is that instead of the classical bar chart thing, which is in many respects not at all in keeping with the overall picture, you've got these separate areas and they're kind of siloed from each other and not really connected, and it conveys, you know, certain messages that are not quite so helpful. The hope is that we can instead present the initial form without numbers as the pot plant style diagram, including the spiral picture, so that the very first thing the pastoral leader would be receiving is, immediately, yes, we can see our maximum factor, we can see our minimum factor, but the immediate thing is, this is about our partnership with God, and this is about us removing barriers to that partnership. So the rich, theology comes into the picture, and it's again a funny thing, this pot plant thing, because one of the reasons I started using it so much was that I was asked to fly to Adelaide in Australia to present to a denominational room of pastors NCD. So I prepared all these things and had this stuff together, and I get there and they said, will 5 minutes be enough? So I'd flown 3 hours, and it was going to be 5-minute presentation. Then they would do their other administrative things, and maybe I could talk to someone afterwards. I was like, oh, yeah, that's terrific. So I extracted everything else, and I just put the pot plant. And thankfully, it was very compelling, because immediately this incredibly rich theological point that's been divisive of the church for 2,000 years. What do we do? What does God do? And focusing too much on what we do, or focusing too much on what God does, and having splits in churches, all sorts of things. But then trying to show this is how that relationship works, and you can know these factors. You're not working, not earning your salvation, nothing like that, but you are participating with God in this process. So that kind of convinced me of the value of that. So we'd like to try to, potentially depict that with just a little bit of narrative to help people understand, just to put it on that position right away. Now, one of the challenges we've often had is that when you have things like just a PDF report, and you design that, you have to make decisions about what will be the first page, and the second page, and the third page. So you're making decisions for the person reading it. Same as writing a book. You do your best to try to roll it out in a way that will make the most sense. The problem with an NCD survey is there's all sorts of different questions, and you're feeding back information about the people. So you want to have some means of going with where they want to go and trying to meet where those questions might be. So in broad terms, even straight away, the question is, well, where to next? Because for some people, they would look at it and say, oh, gift-based ministry. And say, okay, well, I understand probably what that is. So what is that revealing about gift-based ministry? And then someone else says, oh, no, we had charismatic renewal years ago, and everyone started speaking in tongues, and the whole church exploded, so I'm not. Why would we want to look at that? Why would we want to consider that? Why does it matter at all? And so there's a resistance straight away. So the why does this matter would be a highly relevant question. But there might be other people saying, yeah, I've been saying that for years. I've known that's a problem, so I don't need any more analysis. I don't need to know why. Just let me get on with it. Tell me, what can we do about this thing? And these are very real scenarios that we face all the time. So trying to put that in the hands of the leaders, but not just, say, the pastor. We want to make it, and John touched on this, the pressing in deeper into the church life to get NCD embedded with more people. Because that's been one of the single points of failure of the process so many times over, with leaders coming in and the leader changes and everything falls down, and you can't get the consistency. And of course there's pastor insecurity, there's all these sorts of things. So if we make the introduction a little bit gentle. There's no numbers on it. Numbers can be found later, but initially it's unimportant. It doesn't matter if you're at 65 or 25. Your maximum factor and your minimum factor are actually the most important things for your church at this time. So let's reduce the emotional toll of the process and hopefully encourage you to share the result more readily with at least the rest of the leadership team. Also because there'll be certain features that you won't have access to unless your people can actually access that, which is a bit sneaky, but we'll find a way. If that's the case, then that leadership team will have different questions. And we don't want people spending long periods of time having to listen to or deal with certain things when they have a different question. So really trying to meet people at their starting point in the process. So let's imagine we're in a scenario and hammer on about everyone's going to speak in tongues or we're going to have demons on doorknobs or goodness knows what's happening, and need to ask the question, why does this matter? So to make the selection, we'll jump into this area. Now, there's a lot of content collectively in all of this, but always keep in mind, no one's having to read everything. You're just simply going to the next thing that matters most to you and that you can have a look at. Conceptually, what we're trying to do here is that NCD is understandably perceived about bar charts and numbers and statistics and things like that. But when we ask people to take a survey, under the protection of anonymity, we're giving them a chance to express their hearts and feelings and thoughts more openly than any other time in church life. So we're capturing something incredibly precious, and it's actually the heartbeat and narrative of the church. So what we want to try to do as much as possible is to reflect that back as a narrative story, which we can now, from things like AI, to be able to build that out of the huge data set and the pieces of information that all these different people have said and weave that together into some sort of narrative. And so we have, in this instance, 3, again, all in process and under review, but the voice of our people, the lived experience of our congregation. And what I've done here, because I can't out any other denomination, but I can out the one that I grew up in. So I've based this on the snippets you see come from the Salvation Army global analysis that we've been working on. But still, you can imagine this is just also local community church. So the voice of our people. So our strength. We're grateful that this is a people who still care. We see it in the way people pray for one another, in the instinct to move toward those in need, and in the desire to help people find life in Christ. We feel that our leaders genuinely care about people, not just programs or outcomes, and that matters deeply to us. Our struggle, at the same time, many of us quietly struggle to find places where we can be deeply known, trusted, and formed over time. We often experience warmth, activity, and mission, yet still feel uncertain where we truly belong beyond the larger gathering or the immediate demands of ministry. Some of us long for friendships within the church that feel dependable enough to carry real life, not just shared tasks or polite conversations, and more and besides. And as I've piloted this in manual versions so far, it's been absolutely remarkable in multiple instances where you've got results on the table and, I can sort of see that, okay, just have a little read of this. Okay, that's absolutely us. There's absolutely no question. There's not defensiveness because it starts with acknowledging the strength and what we get to enjoy, but then moves to the challenges there at the same time. So in terms of getting people to the place where they're starting to know why this matters and getting rid of all sorts of other crazy ideas, it seems to be having a really positive effect so far. All right, now it might be instead, if someone's really evangelistic and they're primarily interested in those outside the church, and of course the whole NCD Church Survey is ultimately for the purposes of people who aren't there yet. They're not actually there, but we have to work out why they're not there. Because the thing about, if you look at the people who are currently at a church, they're the people who can survive in the church in that current situation. So it's like if it's a church has really low holistic small groups, it's like, oh, that's great. I don't want to talk to anybody. And so it's the same in every instance. If it's low in passionate spirituality, yeah, I don't want much hype, I just kind of want it, a bit quiet, and so it's fine. So it's like a type of soil you can plant this particular plant in, and it will survive. You put other plants in to make it a more diverse garden, and they'll die because it's not actually going to meet them where they happen to be. And so in the same sense, what we're trying to identify is the voice of the people outside, because the people inside are people who would have been outside but managed to make it in because of the circumstances as it currently is. But the minimum factors will identify the kinds of things that are preventing those people from making the journey to life, or at least into your congregation. So this is like the outsider perspective that can be imagined based on the culture of the church. What draws us near? Well, first, what we notice first is that you seem to care. Many churches feel distant, self-protected, or preoccupied with themselves. The Salvation Army often appears willing to move toward people in need rather than away from them. We see practical help, concern for struggling people, and willingness to pray, listen, and respond. What gives us pause? At the same time, some of us are unsure whether we can truly belong here over time. Some of us become needing support, worry that we may receive help without ever really becoming part of a trusted community. We wonder where people talk honestly about life, where friendships become dependable, and where struggling people are patiently formed rather than simply existing. This is heartbreaking for Salvation Army people whose desire is for the lost and the people out there. But when we position it that way, we're saying that's where it falls down, because if you take any movement that's high in need-oriented evangelism, you ask them what their minimum factor is. They say, what's need-oriented evangelism? We need to do more evangelism. Why? Because we're not growing. We're not seeing more people. Okay, there might be another reason for that though. In fact, you probably are seeing people, they're walking through the front door, and they're not quite sure where they're at, or who's able to help them, and then they're drifting out the back door. So it helps put all of that in context. And that leads to the third option, and I won't give any detail on it, but just in terms of background, when you take these freeze frames of what life looks like inside and from the outside perspective, you can start to piece together a really, really important thing that people often don't think about, and that is, what is the journey to life into and through this church? Because I'm outside the church, and something about the life of the church will draw me to the door. Something about the life of the church will draw me through the door. Something about the church will draw me slightly further in, and ultimately all the way potentially to leadership in the church. And it's fascinating to look at the different denominations and what that journey looks like. For some, it's really easy to get to the door, really easy to get in the door, but suddenly it gets really hard. If it's an Anglican church, you've got to cross the moat, you've got to fight off the dragons, you've got to do all sorts of stuff, and then eventually you might make it to the door and throwing arrows down at you. No, it's not really like that at all. But eventually, once you get inside, what beautiful people. What a lovely place to be. I might stay around here now that I've survived the gauntlet. Yes. So that's the journey part that we can draw out in many of these instances. Now, let's imagine instead that we've come in, or maybe we've been satisfied with the why questions, or maybe straight up, all we were really interested in is, what is this revealing? So this kind of green part. Now, the interesting thing about revealing or revelation is it depends upon contrast. You can't see something without contrast. Like on your TV, if you turn the contrast right down, the black and the white get closer to each other, and eventually you can't make anything out. So you only can receive revelation of something if it's contrasted with something else. And so, of course, the church survey has always been a contrast picture of your church against the churches in your whole nation. So we're all familiar with that. And in this, in the first instance, the lens of reality, things emerging from our responses. This will eventually be the home of the usual things we know of, bar charts and that sort of stuff, because we're benchmarking against other churches around. But a little bit deeper, and this is a really critical part. Some of you will know, NCD result guides, and other tools like that we have that try to list the themes behind the minimum factors. And that's been very helpful and came out of lots of research. But what we can now do is bring that down to the most unique theme for this particular church or movement. So it's a little bit like a book title and a subtitle. Salvation Army, need orange evangelism. We move toward need with prayerful compassion. See it now, Hollywood movie. But then on the holistic small groups part, lowest thing, we struggle to form reliable communities of shared growth. And so then this means that it's, yes, every church has a minimum factor, and you might have the same minimum factor, but based upon the items and all the background, we can really hone in on what's the flavour of that minimum factor in that place, because again, we're trying to connect to the hearts of the people and what they actually express through their survey. So we'll have more narrative around that and what forms that up. Now, of course, we talk about contrast then. What about our contrast with Scripture? In a funny way in the NCD world, we've been accused of it certain times about when Christian wrote the NCD book, the White Book, someone said something to him about how unscriptural it was because he counted the number of words in the book and then counted how many words were from Scripture and did a percentage of something, and therefore it's only 3% biblical because it's only got, Mark 4:28 and, a little bit of Corinthians and whatever else. So therefore clearly not biblical. And, we've been shy about it to not want to proof text principles and proof text certain things. And it's a very clear danger because we want to be very nuanced about the way of approaching Scripture. But suddenly we have this, remarkable opportunity to take the whole picture of Scripture, take the analysis of the church and say, what areas are really being grasped here and where are we maybe not going quite so strong? So in some groups that are, strong evangelical, it's almost a cliche, really strong evangelical in some cases, loving relationships comes up really quite low. And so they're strong Bible-believing churches, but somehow that idea that by this they'll know you're my disciples for your love for one another, that's a little bit blurry and not so clear on that. But to bring that into focus and say that if you're an evangelical and you want people to know that you're the disciples of Jesus, what's that one thing? What's the thing you would be known by? Oh, the quality of our sermons and our programs and whatever else. No, by your love for one another, not even your love for them, your love for one another. Why would he pick that? Because it's really hard. And if you can pull that off in a church and actually love each other, they come in and go, that's crazy. Like, I don't know anyone like that in my family or wherever else. So you figured something out here. Anyway, that's all a little bit of an aside, but that's the kind of message that needs to come through. I have duplicate slides. So, in this context, the Global Salvation Army profile reveals a movement rich in compassion, prayer, and outward mission, yet carrying signs of strain in the deeper relational and formative structures needed to sustain that mission over time. The Scriptures repeatedly refuse to separate those two realities. The biblical vision is never mission without formation, compassion without community, or sacrifice without shared life. The people of God are called not only to move toward the world in mercy, but also to become the kind of community capable of carrying mercy faithfully across generations. What follows are several scripture reflections that speak directly into tensions emerging from the data. And so then going through and even some deeper word studies that highlight certain parts. So we can say, we don't mind what you want to contrast with. Maybe the rest of the country, well, I don't care. I'm all about the Bible. Great, let's contrast with the Bible then. We don't mind what it is, but let's help you to have a revelation from contrast. And then the last one I won't go into, but the lens of our own aspirations. What do we say we're about? So you mightn't care about the Bible, you mightn't care about other churches in your country, but what are you telling others that this place is supposed to be about? Okay, let's contrast it with that and see how you're going with what's written in your own documentation. All right, now let's just imagine we've rolled through and instead we've chosen the how can we make progress, or maybe we've gone there straight away because that was the thing that mattered most to us. All right, so You've got this attending to the vine, fixing our trellis, walking the journey. So the trellis and vine kind of picture here is the idea of the organic and the organisational, the structural and the people-oriented part. We've been touching on that a few times about how many churches start making progress in NCD by organising things better, get a little bit down the track, and then they realise that they're not quite so sure about how to grow people. So they put a trellis in place, but they're not tending to the vine, not helping people connect into the vine in discipleship. And so what we then are able to provide is, we've talked about the disciple reality check. The next step of that is exactly the same reality check, but then providing just some additional little prompts based purely out of the results. So as someone in the army might consider, what does Jesus delight in when he looks at you? Oh, I'm not sure. Well, maybe in what ways am I already helping carry the mission of Jesus through prayer, practical care, encouragement, generosity, or faithful service? So, okay, there's some of that. Maybe Jesus is smiling on that. Yes, wonderful. And start to engage with that and other thoughts. And you need to read the other ones yourself. So it's exactly the same reality check questions, but just with some customised prompts to draw out what it looks like in your own church. And as I was talking about yesterday, then this can be used in every conversation wherever you like. You can put these on the screen before worship. You can put them on the leadership table. You can send them to your small groups and just say, every so often go through these questions. And immediately you're going to be changing the church. You're going to be transforming the minimum factor just by asking those questions. All right, then fixing the trellis. Interesting thing about the structural thing and the trellis thing is there's basically only three things you do. You make an addition to the trellis, you remove something, or remove some kind of trellis, or you adjust the trellis. That's really structurally the only kind of components involved in changing structure. And so a trellis addition, well, again, a simple addition would be to actually sort of institutionalise something like the disciple reality check as part of what you do. Add that to the picture so those conversations are happening consistently. Or removing trellis, removing structures and expectations and unnecessarily centralised responsibility and straight out of the results. What does that look like? We don't know. It might be different in different places, but something like that's going to happen. Let's have that conversation, make some action plans and move forward with that. Or a trellis adjustment, adjusting pathways from participation into formation and leadership. And again, so much army thing. It's like, well, here's the fast track line to getting involved and doing ministry. But okay, maybe you can take the second line, which is some formation and discipleship, or whatever you actually most need at the moment. So it's not just into participation, but has other options as well. All right. And then the third component at the moment in the how we make progress, and I touched on this before, but this idea of a 28-day journey that the leadership, or even whole church if you want, can go on a daily devotional across these 4 weeks that cover different areas completely tailored to the results of the church. So week 1 is affirmation, strengthening the fixed leg, helping them to understand these are the strengths of your church, celebrate them, even look for the people who helped that to happen. Throw a party for them, and you need to understand God has done something good already. It's already been all by itself. Then week 2, rather than going straight out to the whole world or even the congregation, let's pause with the leadership. What's it like to lead in this place? The minimum factor will make leadership harder somehow. So let that sit there and let the leaders and the people understand, well, for the leaders' sake even, here are some things that would be very helpful. And each day is got little action steps. Hey, pick up the phone or send a message of encouragement to this person or that person. So you've got lots of people each day taking small steps on that discipleship journey. 3rd week goes to the congregation itself. 4th week goes to those beyond the walls of the congregation to consider them. And again, when we've tried this out a number of times, it's been remarkable the difference from before to after with the people, because there's very little content. they're not consuming very much. For a few minutes each day, over that period of time, together, side by side, they're being immersed in the true reality of church life and then what it can actually be. So we're sort of thinning out that process bump in the process and just allowing it to become a genuine journey. Now you're all going to want to pull your phones out because that QR code is for the full Sabbath report that you may want to thumb through to help your brothers and sisters on the journey. But it's exciting. We're even starting conversations tomorrow and continuing about this. So let's get people together and celebrate and solve and seek out whoever else can join that conversation for a whole global movement. And then we're wanting to do that for multiple denominations and continue to look for them and joining with this at that level. But our primary focus here has mainly been the local church application of this. So you can imagine that for some people, they've received the results, they've seen the pop plant thing, they've maybe clicked and looked at 2 of the sections, and then they're at a point saying, yes, let's go. And that could be, if a person is on the leadership, and I've got a share of the results, great, I'll read that. So, 10, 15 minutes later, I'm ready to go. That's remarkably different to most processes we currently have within that, and no one's had to be burdened with long, boring lectures like this one about the whole thing in the process. They've just been able to move through the parts that matter most to them in order for their energy to be released for the sake of making progress on the journey. Okay, I just want to finish with something around the role of NCD coaches. There's big discussions around the world at the moment, particularly in coach communities, about AI. There's coaching groups saying, we could be out of a job because people can sit there and ask these deep questions and probe all these things. And so, what do we now do if people have that in their pocket in that kind of way? And on holidays, the beginning of this year, going into Christmas last year, my AI popped up something, and just a fun little thing to give you your year in review using AI. And it turned out I was in the top 1% of AI users in the world last year. Because, yes, I've done a huge amount of research because it's part of my responsibility to say how does the NCD world engage with AI in a responsible way? How can we leverage it? And one of the great advantages is that NCD is already an incredibly robust system and function, and it's remarkable what AI already knows about NCD as well. On that basis, that stability allows you to not get pulled around too much because it has to be obeying the principles of NCD in some sense. It's kind of a little bit unable to violate that, which is quite helpful. So we're able to extract quite exceptional things. But what I did after Christmas, on this little break at Christmas, I said to AI, I said, okay, you're really smart, we've done lots of work together last year, but going into this year, I'm just trying to work out what am I good for? Like, of what use am I? And I encourage you, if you use AI, do it sometime. Ask it, like, what am I good for? Because you're good at stuff. And it was absolutely fascinating. And sometimes it's, but you're awesome. So I tell my AI, I don't want to hear nice things, just talk to me. So, but it was very, very interesting because talking about, well, if you need to structure and organise things, if you need to synthesise information and draw out the conclusions, if you need to do this and the other, just don't waste your time. Just give that to me, let me do that. And so I do lots of that. They said, but here's a list of things that I can't do. Can't be present with people. I can't watch body language and know how to respond to something or whether an additional question could be asked. I can't answer a question the person doesn't ask me. Whereas you can ask a question or give an interaction that hasn't been asked of you. And as I read through this list of things, I smiled to myself when I got to the end of it and said, wow, that's remarkably like being like Jesus. The entire list of things. Not getting involved in administrative stuff and organising things and whatever else, but being present in the moment with a person, engaging with them. Their eyebrow just moved, and this happened, and that happened, and showing that interest. So it was very liberating in that sense. I just give the rubbish work to it, and then I say, okay, now I'm free, I've got a bit more space, I can be attentive, or I can be creative, or whatever that happens to be. So in the coach world, if we're putting these things in place, like this analysis and trying to establish, what the data is saying, there's certain parts that reduces the load for a coach. And even in some cases probably helps them to not miss things in their own interpretation. Of course they can add to that, but it lifts a certain load for them. But then it frees them to do the things that humanly, when they come into the room, they can do much more effectively. And I want to say this, and so it's very clear that from my perspective, we need thousands and thousands more coaches in the NCD world, even if we have this AI systems, or even especially because we do, because we may well have many more people wanting to engage. So just a quick list of things to, you can think about yourself, and to what extent do you bring these in? There might be more you can add to the list, but if you think of, when I go to support churches, to what extent am I in this function? And I put this one first because I believe it's one of the biggest ones imaginable. A lender of courage until they find their own. And so many times in the process, it might seem like, we don't know what any of this is about, but you have a conversation and realise, they get it and they understand it. They're just afraid. And you can just say, I worked with a church before that had this, or, I've seen people make progress, and this is not so bad. And a few kind words that reassure them and give them a sense of courage that it's going to be okay, sometimes is all it requires. I've had some people call up a person from another church who's done a survey, like one survey, and said, would you come and talk with us? They say, look, I don't know very much about NCD, we just did one survey. Please come and talk to us. Just the mere fact that someone else had done a survey and was sitting in the room and wasn't dead, hadn't died as a result of doing the process, is almost enough to give courage to, okay, maybe this is not so terrible. Like Christian said, the Trinitarian compass sitting in the compass in conflict, one within the church. Celebrator of what is genuinely good or getting better. There's some churches, they have difficulty, they live in their maximum factor. They don't, it's obvious, but probably most churches are like that. Well, no, they're not. And do you want me to take you to one that's terrible in what you're good at and see what that feels like? I wish I could. Then you could appreciate what God has already done in this place. And it didn't fall from the sky. It's not accidental. And even some churches that make progress very often. We've made 6 points progress over a year. I don't really notice it, don't really feel it. Well, it happened drip by drip over 365 days. So it's not too surprising that you don't necessarily see the heavens opening. But someone has to be there to say, this is amazing. This is not what everyone's doing. This is not happening everywhere. A protected outside observer and voice. I love this one because I can say to people, look, I don't know anybody here. I have no vested interest in anything. I have no political agendas. So I'd just like to ask this question. They ask the question. It's like, yes, but I'm not attacking anybody. It's like, well, that's the elephant in the room that we don't want to talk about. So that's a critical role to be able to play. A gentle disruptor and challenger of assumptions is a very, very helpful role to play because churches are full of assumptions. Like I said before, we're low in this area, but I think all churches in our country would be low in that area. Well, by definition, they can't be because this survey is measured against churches in your country. So there's as many churches good at that as you are not so good at that. Carrier of stories, wisdom, and experience. So the stories along the way, the wisdom, that what was able to be done in a difficult situation, all of these things are really, really valuable. Accountability partner is of course a big one because, okay, what are you committing to? Great, I'll call you on that date, or we'll meet up and we'll ask the questions and make sure that you're following through with that. And a multiplier of other coaches is a super critical role because as you work with others, walk alongside others, and bring other people with you as you're doing this kind of work, you have a tremendous ability to do that. Or even as you work with a church, you see someone's really lit up about the process. That, wow, I'm so excited about that. Oh, well, maybe you'd be happy sometime to go and work with another church and help them out. So that's a gigantic role for that. And a bridge to the wider NCD community and toolbox. So just helping them know they can find other people, there's other tools they have access to. So that's an enormous amount that's super important for coaches to do, and like I say, we need thousands and thousands more people like this, and all of that's essential, irrespective of what AI does anytime soon, until the chapel robot was created. So.
Can I comment?
Yes.
Because do I need a mic? Sorry. Thanks for the list. It's great. If I should say one thing that I think sums up all this that we have faced a lot in Norway, is that the coach's role of loving the church they are coaching, and I think that's with all of these things included.
Yes, yes. Yeah, excellent.
Loving.
Yeah, the coach's role of loving the church would be a good summary of that. Are there any other observations or anything you would be inclined to add to the list from your experiences of what is valuable to bring to the coaching role, or what you can bring as an outside person?
I think your first point about bringing hope and courage, I mean, sometimes I think that's the most important thing I bring as a coach is, yeah, we've seen all this come before, we're not worried about it. You don't need to do either. And don't be discouraged. Yeah. Which is part of it all.
Yeah. We can also come with energy.
Yes, we come with energy. Which is, yeah, that's very valuable. So that you meet the church and they're like this. It's okay.
Because we are so short of coaches in India, we try to the denominations that are interested, we try to motivate them to design someone who would be interested in NCD, learn from us, and become their coach within their own. So then it will lack maybe the external vision, because they will operate within the culture and assumption that at least something will be done in direction of NCD development.
Yes. And we certainly want to, trainers of coaches and developers of coaches. And to Christian's point earlier about the preconditions for starting the NCD process, I'm inclined to say something at least similar in terms of starting with coaching in NCD. Because you know that in the NCD world we don't tend to provide endorsements or authoritative things. We more or less say, well, yes, have a conversation with this person. If it's helpful, that's great. If it's not helpful, maybe I'll have another conversation. But see what that looks like. Because there's such a range of what people may need in the coaching realm, anything from just sitting down and with someone who has taken a survey before. You might think, oh, is that really coaching? Well, it's helping advance someone to the next step along the way. And so we have to be thinking in terms of the progressive development of coaches, because of course there's ones dramatically more experienced than others, but I'm not that convinced that sitting in a room for 2 days having a coach training thing, suddenly you arrive at that place. It's a launch pad, but what we need is the ongoing progressive development, connecting those people together, learning communities, all those sorts of things, which means that people can get going even at a somewhat earlier level. So I would just like to open it, just for the last couple of minutes, more broadly in terms of the overall church survey package. If you have comments on what I've just presented in where we're trying to move towards, you might have general questions or want to raise concerns about certain parts, things that could be improved, whatever it happens to be. Here's your chance. I'll be brave.
I'm over from Norway, and I want to tell you how we have
trained the coaches in Norway for nearly 30 years. Because that has given us a stability in NCD for that many years. Remember that Norway is a very small country, 6 million people, that's nothing. But that means that Christians and Christian leaders know each other, more or less. So we have always trained the common coaches from different denominations and not from the same. And I guess that this has been a blessing also from God. So I would choose to train from different churches and different denominations. We use a lot of time for the teaching. We stay together at the school, often like this, and stay together for a week, Monday until Friday. They give a lot of teaching, but also a good possibility to think and to relax and to talk and to pray together. And then those who want to be coaches, they get a book list. So they have to read and write report, and they get very important comments on the report. So it has not a heavy, but it has an academic side of it. And then the third aspect is that the newcomer follows an experienced coach. And the best is if he or she can follow this coach in the church through whole the NCD cycle, from preparing for a survey and then presenting the survey and so on, as you know. And the ideal is that a common coach will experience 2 NCD cycles, 2 different churches and 2 different cycles. And when you then get your diploma as a coach, you are permitted to coach in different denominations. And sure, as you understand, it's each church who chooses its coach. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmett. I appreciate enormously the ongoing support that you have with your coaches and the fact that the quality increase in Norwegian churches is at the level that it is, and we look at it globally, which is fantastic. Any other broad comments or questions from the survey?
Hi, we were wondering, or I was wondering, part of the coach's role in many ways is to translate the language into that context. But how far can that translation go?
Like translation of key terms? Yes, okay. Certainly, I know Christian's position is that he's generally been frustrated that people have been too conservative in the way they would explain the terms. I had an instance of an Anglican church in Australia that had need orange evangelism that was low, and they just the E word was forbidden. You know, we can't have that conversation, evangelism. And so they ended up renaming it need-oriented angelism. Sure. And suddenly, exactly the same data, exactly the same items and low points were being vigorously looked at and talked about, and how can we can make actions there, because at least at that point in time, this kind of evangelism was in their mind, and that's what it took. And so it's quite common for the adjustment to be made, because at the end of the day, the survey is measuring the principle. If you call it something different, you're still dealing with the same results in any case. And if you change it too much, if it, oh, instead of empowering leadership, we'd rather call it dominating leadership. So, sure, you call it that if you like, and we'll do the next survey. See how we progress. So we always strongly encourage that contextualization, that because it's words, you know, and the principles are expressed in words, but they're not words. Their reality is richer than words. So please feel free to do that, and send in your creative ideas.
Thank you. We've been experimenting in Canada a little bit with kind of narratively trying to describe what the reports say. And the feedback we've been getting is that that's been very helpful. As you're revealing to us, I think it was 8.0, I think I'm asking about 10.0, or maybe it's 12.0, and kind of picks up with what was being asked with the last question. With the capabilities that are available right now, you know, what's your imagination about what those next couple iterations might look like? So, for example, the narrative reports are very cool and very helpful. Do you see a day when that is customized to the denomination, so that the language that's being produced in the reports is a little bit tailored to, you know, what kind of church is this? And, you know, as a coach, you know, I would see a role as additionally contextualizing that. If we know the churches that we're coaching well, we should be able to say, okay, well, this is kind of how you might be experiencing this because I know a little bit about your story. So if you're having trouble understanding this, so what's next? Not to push you, or what's your perspective on that?
Yes, a great question at the very end of the conference. Oh, shame revealing in this other door. I think in the contextualization to the denominational level, I don't necessarily imagine seeing that happen because the higher you go, the more people you include in a naming group, the more abstract the language sort of needs to be, and that's like the names of the quality characteristics are, as they are expressed now, are the names that can best be handled broadly by the widest part of the Christian church right now. So even in the denomination, as you go up, you know, broader and broader, it's more likely to be less fine-tuned rather than more fine-tuned. But certainly at the local level, you know, working with the terminology makes a lot of sense. And of course, having those subtitles too, because that becomes their unique label for those things. I mean, in the further development, what we'd like to have in this as well is automatically providing a suggested list for coaches of the kinds of questions that might be useful and might draw out things that are found in the data. That also protects the coaches a bit as well, because they can be a little bit more bold, saying, well, the system suggests that this is a question, so I'll innocently ask you this question that could be really quite penetrating there. I mean, I don't know which point it would be, but we certainly are wanting to consolidate the data more so that if you happen to be an area person in a denomination or a denominational leader, that in your pocket you can actually have the denominational profile live and updated instead of me producing them. So you can simply see that and you can check in on the different churches and also know the kinds of things if you walk into a context. This is the conversation to have. So that thing we're talking about, getting denominational leaders having their data, hopefully they'll see it as so convenient and say, well, why would you not want to do that at the same time?
Maybe you've already said this, and I just wasn't hearing it, but it seems like the greatest skill set for a coach is being able to ask really, really good questions. Hear what's going on, be in tune, and then come back with the thing that maybe pushes a bit, encourages, loves.
Yep, absolutely.
Maybe we need some training on how to ask really good questions.
Yes. And I think getting clues about the sort of kinds of questions drawn from the data will be helpful. We'll sharpen that even more, which is great. Wonderful. Thank you all.